Hey guys, welcome back. The last few years have been a rather slow time for Halo's story. We've had a few books and some minor lore drops here and there, but the long and agonizing wait for Halo Infinite kinda put the brakes on Halo's main story. But the end is finally in sight for this drought, and so I thought we'd celebrate in about the most depressing way possible by taking a look at the 7 best character deaths in Halo from the games and also the expanded universe. The Halo universe's total kill count is probably somewhere in the trillions, if not more than that, and today we are going to celebrate that rather morbid fact. Quick reminder that of course this list is just my opinion, so leave what your thoughts and rankings are down below in the comments. Also, if my voice still sounds weird, I still have tonsillitis, and for some stupid reason I'm recording a 3,500 word Halo video, so do with that what you will. But now, let's begin counting down what I believe to be the 7 best character deaths in the entire Halo series. Okay, so kicking off the list in the number 7 spot, we have the king of the Spartans, Lieutenant Commander Kurt Ambrose, Spartan 051. Kurt was a legendary Spartan 2 who spent his final days training the Spartan 3s in secrecy on Onyx, the shield world that he gave his life to prevent the Covenant from gaining access to. When the Covenant fleet of Homogeneous Clarity, led by Fleetmaster Voronar Mantikree, discovered Onyx, they immediately set a course for the world with haste. Within its core, accessed via portals in its core room, were a significant number of ancient foreign artifacts that would have given the Covenant one hell of an upper hand in the war. And when Kurt, Blue Team, the Spartan 3s, and the other allies caught wind of this, they knew they had to do whatever they could to deny the Covenant access. They put up as much resistance as possible, falling back until they reached the core room, where they were forced to make their final stand. But sadly, the Covenant's numbers were simply too great. In a last-ditched effort to save his comrades and to also deny the Covenant their prize, Kurt ordered Halsey, Mendez, Blue Team, and the remaining Spartan 3s to retreat through the portal into the safety of the shield world, while he, injured from the last wave of Covenant, would stay behind and close the portal. He promoted Fred to Lieutenant Junior Grade to lead the others in his stead, and after much resistance, forced the Spartan 3s, Tom and Lucy, through the portal before closing it. When the next wave of Covenant arrived, led personally by their Fleetmaster, Kurt said his final explosive goodbyes to the world. Mantikree approached him, lamenting the fact that his death would be for nothing as the Elite's engineers would simply just reopen the portal once he was gone. To which Kurt replied, laughing, "Die? Didn't you know? Spartans never die," before detonating 2 nuclear warheads, destroying the entire structure, killing the hundreds of Covenant within, and awakening the Insulation Sentinels, who quickly flew into orbit and destroyed the entire Covenant fleet. So, needless to say, Kurt died a hero's death. He really took going out with a bang to a whole new level. Following his death, Onyx was then renamed Trevelyan, honouring the Spartans' original surname. Coming in at the number 6 spot, we have one of the most unfortunate deaths in the entire series that I think could have changed the entire Halo timeline had it been averted. Caesar Refame, the heretic leader in Halo 2. Caesar was an elite who led an artifact retrieval group under the Arbiter's command during the Battle of Alpha Halo, but towards the end of it, he got stranded on a gas mine in Threshold's atmosphere following the Halo's destruction, and was left behind when the Arbiter returned to High Charity. Stranded on the gas mine, he and his elites encountered Guilty Spark, who slowly, over the course of a few weeks, revealed to them the true nature of the Halos, and eroded their faith in the Great Journey and the Prophets, leading to he and his warriors becoming heretics. Now, of course, we all know how the rest goes. Caesar doesn't exactly live for very long after declaring the Great Journey a lie, but what makes his death stand out so much to me is how unbelievably close he was to completely changing the tide of the war. When he tells Spark to explain the reality and the truth of the Halo rings, the Arbiter is genuinely listening, so much so that he even lowers his carbine. Caesar had his attention, he was listening, he was receptive, but sadly, he thought that his former leader was too far gone, and opened fire, which of course led to his death. Now, I genuinely believe that had Caesar given Spark the chance to explain the truth, he would have managed to sow the seeds of doubt in the Arbiter's mind and change the course of his actions for the rest of Halo 2. It goes without saying, but the Arbiter was a pretty receptive guy. He wasn't blinded by his faith, at least as much as the rest of the Covenant. I think if anyone would have taken into consideration what he was about to hear, it was the Arbiter. But Caesar never gave him a chance. As soon as he shot, he was a dead man, and out the window went his chance to sway one of the most important members of the entire damn Covenant to his side and make him realise that what he was fighting for was a lie. Utter shame. In the number 5 spot, we have the death of Spartan 2 Samuel 034. A death that could only be described as a watershed moment for both the UNSC and the Spartans, but more specifically, for the Master Chief. Sam was the first Spartan 2 to ever be killed by the Covenant. During the very early days of the war in the November of 2525, he, Chief and Kelly boarded a Covenant ship, the Unrelenting, to destroy it and prevent it from annihilating the UNSC frigate, Commonwealth. As they searched the ship for the engine room, they came under fire from a squad of jackals, and Sam quickly jumped in front of Chief to protect him from a plasma pistol bolt. Now, the damage wasn't lethal, all it did was break a hole in his vacuum suit. But when the Spartans planted their bombs in the engine room, it quickly became clear that the only way to exfil from the ship was via space, which Sam's armour was no longer rated for. So, to allow him an honourable death, Chief ordered that he stay behind and defend the engine room long enough for the explosives to detonate, and so Sam died a hero, not only ensuring the Unrelenting was destroyed, but also saving the life of John 117, and I don't think I need to tell you how important that was. But the reason that I think Sam's death was so important goes beyond just saving the life of the Master Chief. His death helped shape Chief into the soldier that he is today. It haunted him for a long time after, making him second guess everything that he did that led up to that moment. But it wasn't all doom and depression. Because this was one of the UNSC's first ever victories against the Covenant, it gave Chief and the rest of the Spartans hope that the Covenant could in fact be defeated. They weren't these invincible, unstoppable aliens. Like any enemy, they had weaknesses, and the Spartans could damn well exploit them. Following Sam's death, Chief also altered his approach to combat scenarios as a leader as well. Perpetually haunted by the fact that Sam died to save him, he was terrified of losing any more Spartans and would refuse to send any of them on suicide missions, and would always ensure they had emergency patching kits, extra thrusters, and locator beacons, purely to avoid this situation from reoccurring. It's clear that Sam's death had a remarkable impact on Chief, more so than any other death he probably experienced, and I think it's very clear that Chief would not be the soldier that he is today were it not for Sam dying to save him. And furthermore, it's actually been speculated in-universe that the EOD Mjolnir was created specifically to prevent deaths like Sam's from happening again. Okay, so before we continue, a quick word from today's sponsor. You guessed it, Audible. I mean, you know the deal by now, right? Audible is packed to the brim with the highest volume of Halo lore in the universe. There are audiobooks here for literally every single kind of Halo fan out there. New Audible members can try Audible and dive into this hefty volume of lore for 30 days on us, and as a premium member, you get 1 credit every month to redeem for any title in the premium section. So not only is there a sizable volume of Halo audiobooks on Audible, but you can even get one of these audiobooks for free every month as a premium member. We got The Fall of Reach, we got the entire Forerunner trilogy, we got Ghosts of Onyx, we've got Shadows of Reach, the entire Kilo 5 trilogy, The Flood, Fractures, and we've even got Divine Wind, the sequel to Shadows of Reach that literally just released. So come on, what are you waiting for, Chief? Start listening to this luscious Halo lore with a 30-day free Audible trial today by going to audible.com/HiddenXperia or by texting HiddenXperia to 500 500. Let me just say that one last time real quick for Kurt and for Sam, who are in the afterlife listening and kind of had their eardrums perforated by explosions. And that you can also learn more about with Audible. Audible.com/HiddenXperia or text HiddenXperia to 500 500 to start listening today. Cheers Audible, back to the video. Okay, so coming in at the number 4 spot, we have the death of one of the coolest elites to ever live, Bero Kusavai. Bero was one of, if not the most talented Blade Master in the entire Covenant, so much so that he earned the AI suffix at the end of his surname, which was exclusive to Blade Masters. He frequently trained alongside his good friend, the legend Ricardus Vadam, Halfjaw, one of the few Blade Masters to ever really come close to rivaling his skill with a sword. Both of these distinguished warriors also served as Spec Ops elites in the Arbiter's fleet of particular justice during the war on Alpha Halo, but sadly only one would survive this skirmish. Following the release of the Parasite on the surface of the Halo, an agricultural ship within the fleet, the Infinite Succor, was boarded by unknown hostiles, and the Arbiter sent Artas, Sub-Commander Kusavai, and a contingent of Spec Ops elites and grunts to go and deal with it. Shortly after this elite squad boarded the ship, however, it became clear that this was not the work of the demon, rather, the Flood had infected the ship. Knowing that the only course of action was to destroy the ship in its entirety, the Spec Ops team began cutting their way through the Parasite, while at the same time meandering through the orders of this weak, spineless prophet that was stranded on board. Bero was making quick work of the Parasite with his dual swords, and so Artas ordered that him and a small team escort the Prophet to the hangar for evac, while he made his way to engineering to set the ship on a course directly into the sun to destroy it once and for all. Artas had no doubt that Bero, arguably the best Sangheili swordsman in the entire Covenant, would be able to cut his way through the Flood. However, there's a chance he may have underestimated how bad this infestation was. When he arrived at engineering, the Prophet presented himself on the view screen, infected, and then, behind him, entered what remained of his escort team, an infected Bero Kusavai. The two legendary Blade Masters quickly engage each other in combat, their final sword duel together. After a long, brutal clash, Artas sliced his former friend in half, allowing him to die with the honour he deserved. Bero was one of the greatest Blade Masters to ever live, and the fact that he went out the way he did was both tragic and also quite fitting. I mean, he was a twisted shadow of his former self, but still, he died not only doing the thing that gave him his role in life, but doing it with an almost equally as skilled friend. Strangely badass, tragic, and wholesome all at the same time. Okay, so coming in at the number 3 spot, we have a bit of a different entry. Noble Team. Now, I'm going to classify Noble Team as like one collective character because, honestly, I feel like doing a list like this and not including all of their deaths would be nothing short of a travesty. To say Noble Team's deaths were memorable is quite the understatement. One of my favourite things about their deaths is the irony that underlays them. George, a Reach native who would do anything to save his home, didn't actually die on the planet, nor did he save it. Kat, the brains and technology master of the team, was shot in the head because her shields failed. Carter, the commander, went down with the ship. Emil, the CQC master and knife aficionado, was stabbed in the back, and Noble 6, the lone wolf, died alone. This bittersweet irony was such a great detail, but honestly, my favourite thing about their deaths as a whole, as morbid as that sounds, is how emblematic they were of the Battle of Reach as a whole. Reach's entire story worked to kind of dispel this myth that the Spartans, and by extension humanity as well, were this invincible force that could fight their way out of any corner they found themselves backed into. A myth that, really, Halo 1 to 3 had worked to create. So seeing an entire fire team of Spartans fall right before your eyes, not in a blaze of glory or going down in a hail of bullets or anything, but just in the same way that any trooper would go down, dispelled that myth perfectly. Noble Team's death cemented the fact that the Spartans are still human underneath all the Mjolnir, and just as Sam's death proved to the Spartans that the Covenant had weaknesses that could be exploited, Noble Team's deaths proved to the casual and non-book reading Halo fans that the same was the case for the Spartans. They aren't these invincible superheroes that Master Chief made them look like. Realistically, they're just as vulnerable as you or I. In the number 2 spot, we have one of the most disturbing deaths in the entire Halo franchise, Private Wallace A. Jenkins. Private Jenkins was one of the unfortunate Marines who was by Key's side when the Flood were released. The entire squad, besides Johnson of course, were infected, but Jenkins' infection didn't quite go as planned. See, the infection form that burrowed into his chest had withered away from centuries of containment, and so the infection process only really half worked. His body was infected normally, but Jenkins was still alive inside, so all the horrific and painful mutations that occur when infection happens, Jenkins was alive and receptive for all of them. However, this partial infection also meant that when the infection form itself sustained damage, Jenkins was able to briefly regain control of his body, and when he and the rest of the Flood escaped the swamp facility and encountered a squad of ODSTs, he tried to use this ability to end his own suffering, walking into the troopers' line of fire, but sadly, it didn't work. He was instead taken hostage by them and interrogated, during which the infection form sprouted a new tentacle out of his hand, breaking the bones and bursting the veins in the way to try and kill the interrogators, of which, once again, it failed to do. The ODSTs then took Jenkins to the flood-infested Truth and Reconciliation. Their plan was to use the damaged ship to escape the Halo and return to human-controlled space. But Jenkins knew that it was a Flood hive and that if the ODSTs were successful, humanity would all be infected. So he managed to regain control for long enough to try and destroy the ship's fiber optic pathway, which in turn would explode the engines. But sadly, once again, Jenkins failed. However, Lieutenant ODST Melissa McKay realised what he was trying to do, and suddenly their plans of returning home were no more. She finished what Jenkins had started, severing the pathway, causing the engines and the entire ship to explode, killing them all and releasing Jenkins from his suffering. Private Jenkins went out a hero, as did the rest of the ODSTs he was with, for that matter. His final hours of life, if you can even call it that, were torturous beyond all human belief, but he fought through the mental and physical pain to ensure the Flood didn't leave the ring, and to ensure that no other human would meet a similar fate. It's a pretty horrific death, but absolutely a memorable one. Okay, so as you all know, you simply can't have a Halo Countdown video without some honourable mentions. By the law of Anoj, it is simply illegal. But for this countdown video, we're going to do the honourable mentions a bit differently. We're going to quickfire them all in this section. So, here goes. Sergeant Avery J. Johnson. I mean, I don't think anything really needs to be said here. Johnson was one of Halo's greatest heroes, and the guy went out with a bang. A very, very sad yet heroic death. Cortana. Yes, regardless of whatever garbage story beats we were fed in Halo 5, Cortana very much died in Halo 4, and her death was framed perfectly. Her final goodbye to Chief is one of the saddest moments in the entire series. That entire scene is just S+ tier. The Prophet of Truth. Incredible death scene, the perfect end to not only the Covenant story arc, but also to the Arbiters as well. The amount of emotion the Arbiter shows when he puts his blade through the spine of the Covenant makes it one of the most memorable Halo moments of all time. Sergeant John Forge. The guy went out a hero and gave his life to prevent Regret from getting his hands on a fleet of foreigner ships that, without a shadow of a doubt, would have allowed the Covenant to win the war convincingly. Captain Keyes. He went out in a similar fashion to Jenkins, but also had his memories dug into and tainted by the Flood as they used his body and mind to form the basis of a proto-Gravemind. That's a pretty horrific death right there. And finally, Offensive Bias. He's not exactly dead, more so in a very Halo fashion, he's missing in action. But he won arguably the most pivotal war in the history of the Halo universe. Outnumbered 436.6 to 1 by Mendicant Bias's Flood fleet, Offensive managed to outsmart his predecessor for long enough to ensure its defeat. And that leads very, very nicely into the number 1 spot. Let's send this countdown out with a bang, a galactic superluminal bang. The number 1 character death in all of Halo is the entire Forerunner Empire. A death that, had it not occurred, well, we'd all be speaking Flood right now. Throughout their time as the de facto kings of the universe, the Forerunners committed sin after sin in pursuit of the mantle of responsibility. The primo sin, however, was their extermination of the precursors, the entities responsible for the creation of all life in the galaxy. They eradicated pretty much all of them, but the few precursors who survived this bloody genocide corrupted, and later returned to the galaxy as the Genesis form of the Flood. This sparked the beginning of the end of this era of the Halo universe. The Flood quickly spread throughout ancient human space, leading indirectly to their defeat and subsequent resetting back to the Stone Age, which was, again, done by the Foreigners, but that's a whole different war crime for a whole different video. Following the defeat of ancient humanity, the Flood retreated for a short while, but when they returned more relentless than ever and began consuming entire Foreigner colony worlds, ships, and entire armies with ease, using this newfound biomass to convert whole colony worlds into hyper-intelligent keymind forms, and even going as far as corrupting Mendicant Bias, the AI in charge of the entire Foreigner war effort. It quickly became clear to the few Foreigners who still remained that victory was no longer possible. The plethora of sins they had committed over the millennia had become their undoing, and so, in a very, very on-brand fashion, they resorted to one of their most contentious but necessary creations to ensure the Flood would not reign victorious: the Halos. From the Ark, the entire Halo array was activated, wiping out all sentient life in the galaxy, including the Foreigners. However, as we know, that wasn't the end of the story. Thanks to the Librarian's conservation measure, specimens of each species were catalogued, which ensured life in the galaxy could begin anew once the Foreigners were gone. As genocidal as it was, what they did was necessary to ensure their sins would not lead to the end of the galaxy, and in doing so, they allowed all life to teem and prosper after they'd wiped themselves out. Their ultimate sacrifice of species-wide suicide gave the galaxy a second chance at life, free from the sins of the Father. And that is why I think the death of the entire Foreigner Empire is the best death in the entire Halo universe, because if it never happened, well, we'd all be speaking Flood right now. But what do you think? Let me hear your rankings and what you thought of my list down below in the comments. I'm sure there's some great deaths out there that I forgot about, so leave them down in the comments. And with that said, let's round this one out here. I want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons for the continued support over there, and thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.